Welcome to week 7 of OT 531, the Hebrew Prophets. Today we're going to spend a little time looking at exile temptations. You may think of exile being a really rough time, but in some ways it can present its own unique temptation to fall away from the Lord. When the prophets saw and heard and spoke and wrote their oracles, everything that was prediction in that prophecy was the future. We know that prophecy is mostly forthtelling, declaring God's truth, and only a little bit forthtelling or foretelling, telling the future. But there is the future part. But when the prophets talked about the future, of course, everything for them was the future. That's a contrast to where we are, because 2,500 years later, we stand in the middle of the fulfillment of what they prophesied. Half of what they predicted came to pass in the life of Jesus and the early church. However, there's still approximately half that stretches out in front of even us. And I'm not sure that we can accurately tell when those events are going to happen in the future, at what date, any better than the prophets to whom God revealed them. The picture that helps me understand this comes from a view atop of one of Oregon's many mountain ridges. As you look to the horizon, you can see many other ridge lines. Sometimes you can tell where one range ends and another begins, but often you can't. And you can't tell the distance between the various hills and ridge lines either. I know I've tried it and it always frustrates me. I get back home and I look at a map and I can't imagine how far off I was. You never really have any idea as you're looking off into the distance how apart each one of those places is. And it's the same with eschatology, with descriptions of the end time. All those events are in the future to us. It's mighty hard to be able to tell from the subtleties of the text how far apart they are from each other. Besides that, the purpose of eschatology is to motivate us to stay true to the gospel until God brings human history to a close. This is Jesus' pervasive theme. Many of his parables talk about being purpose of eschatology, making us ready for when the bridegroom returns. And so when we read biblical descriptions about the end of time, the future, we should focus perhaps more on the who than the when. The who is, of course, is Jesus. It's the person who controls our history, who controls the end time, and it's also the who of the person who waits for us. The timeline of when the prophecies in Daniel are subject to many interpretations, some of which you might want to read about as you do your journal article. The force, the who, that controls the fulfillment of those is not left open to speculation. God is in control of history, and one day that control would dominate either for our joy or dismay. Our textbook is very helpful in its treatment of Daniel, talking about Smith, of course. All the way through, Smith draws our attention to the emotional, spiritual, and moral impact that the messages would produce among the Jewish exiles living in Babylon. Daniel lived in exile in Babylon for most of his life. The greatest threat to Daniel's Judaism was very different from the fierce persecution that would produce John's revelation. Both of them talk about the future and about some similar events. But the Revelation was written during a time of intense persecution of Christians. Daniel is written at a time that's very different, that's very comfortable. Life for Jews in Babylon was so good that they were tempted to give up their faith. Hey, God had not saved them in Judah, but now they were living in comfort in the sphere of Babylon's gods. And so Smith's question, who rules the world, is probably what many of the Jews were asking themselves. I thought I'd give you some extended quotes about what life was like as a Jew in Babylon during Daniel's ministry. The first one begins this way. While it seemed like tragedy at the time, these brilliant men, Torah scholars, immediately established a Jewish infrastructure upon arrival in Babylon. A dozen years later, when the temple was destroyed, the Jews who were exiled to Babylon founded in Babylon yeshivas, synagogues, kosher butchers, the whole works, all the essentials for maintaining an active and satisfying Jewish life. 70 years later, when the Babylonians fell to the Persians and the Jews were permitted by the Persians to return to their homeland, only a small percentage did. Of what may have been as many as 1 million Jews living in the Persian Empire, of that only 42,000 returned, meaning that the vast majority stayed in Babylon under Persian domination. Babylon was the Jewish people's first experience of exile since the days of biblical Egypt. Egypt had been slavery, blood, sweat, toils, abuse, and atrocities. By contrast, Babylon was relatively benign, particularly after the death of Nebuchadnezzar and the ascension to the throne of his son Evil-Merodach. The Talmud says that God knew, so to speak, that the Jewish people were not ready to survive the terrible rigors of Roman exile, which be replete with murder, constant persecution, and uncertainties, and therefore he exiled the Jews to Babylon first, to kind of get them ready, as you will. If nothing else, the Jews, many of them became very wealthy and rose to positions of prominence in economics and politics. So that's what life was like, not maybe what we would think of when we use the word exile. Some American Christians today need Daniel's stories and visions for the same reason his friends needed them. We live in an affluent society, which seems to be controlled by raw economics and powerful armies. Is God really a factor, we might ask? And when we get tossed into the fire, to whom do we turn? To drugs, to economics, to our political persuasions? More than that, eschatology, the study of the end times, reminds us that no matter how pleasant this world seems, there is a world coming which makes it pale by comparison. Or, conversely, when the world seems pervasively painful, eschatology reminds us of the brighter world coming. And so, in short, no matter how real this world feels, eschatology reminds us that there is a more real world to come. Well, now for a word about the Prophet Project. This week there's not an assignment to turn in, but it is the time that you should begin crafting your final presentation of your Prophet Project. The better you work on it this week, the better your grade will be next week. One of my mentors, Jack Wilcotts, loved to warn me, there's no such thing as good writing, only good rewriting. No matter how hard you work on your project, you will do twice as well if you write it, let it sit, and come back and edit it. Your content should be balanced and persuasive, and the balance was what I was trying to get at by having you do the concern and the promise and the theology, is giving it good context, good biblical grounding, but also empathizing with your audience, as well as a clear call to separation from the ways of the world. Finish your first draft of your project and then have someone else proofread it before posting it. Have a friend or a spouse read it through and see if it makes sense. Does it balance? Is it an integrated thing? You may want to add some, or you might want to reshape some of the parts that you've done. Don't just plop them together, but use it to craft something that is for you a persuasive message dealing with a real problem today and presenting God's call to action. Your presentation needs to be professional and attractive. If it's an essay, you need to follow all of the form for that. If it's a video or a song, it needs to be an incredibly well done video or incredibly well done song. Editing transforms your project from something only that you would enjoy to something that enlightens, provokes, and persuades others. Well, I hope you have a good time this week reading Haggai and Daniel. They're both great works, very different, but written at a very similar time and addressing various needs of the church.